In the vast darkness between stars, where ancient civilizations whisper of legends and myths, there exists a truth that chills even the most hardened warriors to their core. They speak of a species so young that their homeworld still bears the scars of primitive wars, yet so terrifyingly effective in combat that their very name has become synonymous with the impossible. They call them humans, but this is not a story about humanity's mighty fleets or their legendary generals. This is about one human, a small, quiet figure who never spoke above a whisper, who flinched at loud noises, who seemed to disappear into shadows whenever conflict arose. The galactic community saw her as broken, damaged, perhaps even defective by human standards. They could not have been more wrong, for in the depths of space, where the greatest threat to all sentient life was about to emerge, this silent human would discover that sometimes the softest voices carry the sharpest blades. Sometimes those who seem weakest possess a strength that can reshape the very fabric of war itself. Her name was Sarah Chen, but before this tale ends, the universe would know her by another name entirely, one that would be whispered in reverence and shouted in defiance across 1,000 worlds. The galaxy was about to learn that humans don't just fight wars, they transcend them. The cargo bay of the interstellar transport ship Meridian's Edge hummed with the low vibration of faster-than-light engines, but Sarah Chen barely noticed the sound that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat over the past 6 months. She sat in the corner, knees drawn up to her chest, watching the other passengers through careful glances that never lingered long enough to draw attention. Most of the travelers were returning to their homeworlds after various business dealings on the human colony of New Terra. The Zephyrians, with their elongated limbs and crystalline skin, discussed trade agreements in their melodic voices. A group of Chronari merchants, their thick, beetle-like carapaces gleaming under the artificial lighting, argued over shipping routes. Even a few Etherians floated near the viewport, their gaseous forms shifting between pale blues and purples as they conversed in frequencies barely audible to most species. Sarah understood every word they said. Her neural implant, a standard-issue device for human diplomats and translators, processed dozens of galactic languages simultaneously, but understanding and participating were two very different things. She had not spoken to another sentient being in 3 days, not since the brief exchange with the Meridian's captain when she had boarded. Destination? The captain, a weathered Terran with cybernetic eyes, had asked. Kepler Station, she had whispered, her voice barely audible over the ambient ship noise. He had looked at her strangely, this small human woman with dark hair that fell across her face like a protective curtain, and marked something on his passenger manifest. Sarah had seen the notation when he turned the tablet. Human female, possible medical condition affecting speech. Handle with care. If only he knew how wrong he was. The truth was that Sarah Chen spoke 17 galactic languages fluently, held 3 degrees in xenolinguistics, and had spent the last 5 years serving as a translator for the Terran Diplomatic Corps. She could negotiate trade disputes between species that had been at war for centuries, could find common ground in the most complex political situations, and had once prevented an interstellar incident by correctly interpreting a single gesture from an alien ambassador that others had missed entirely. But that was before the Battle of Rigel 7, before the screaming, before the nightmares that came every time she closed her eyes. A sudden increase in the engine's pitch drew her from her memories. The ship was dropping out of hyperspace, which meant they were approaching Kepler Station. Sarah gathered her few belongings, a single travel bag containing clothes, her personal datapad, and the sealed orders that would determine her fate for the next several years, and prepared to disembark. Kepler Station was massive, a sprawling structure built into a hollowed-out asteroid that served as a neutral meeting ground for dozens of species. As Sarah made her way through the docking bay, she marveled at the diversity around her. Towering Vortian warriors with their 4 arms and stone-like skin stood guard at various checkpoints. Delicate Sylvani, barely 3 feet tall with gossamer wings, flitted between the larger species like living flowers. The air itself was a carefully balanced mixture of atmospheres, allowing most oxygen-breathing species to coexist comfortably. Sarah's destination was Sector 7, the military quarter where the Galactic Defense Force maintained its regional headquarters. The GDF was humanity's attempt at integration with the larger galactic community, a joint military force that combined the tactical genius that humans seem to possess naturally with the advanced technologies and diverse capabilities of allied species. The corridor leading to the GDF offices was lined with memorial walls, holographic displays showing the faces of soldiers from dozens of species who had died in various conflicts. Sarah paused before one particular section, where the memorial read, Battle of Rigel 7, Heroes of the 23rd Combined Fleet. Her breath caught as she saw familiar faces among the fallen, colleagues who had died while she lived, soldiers who had screamed for help in languages she understood perfectly but had been powerless to save. You must be Chen. Sarah spun around, startled by the voice. A tall human man in GDF uniform stood behind her, his expression neutral but not unkind. The rank insignia on his collar identified him as commander, and the name tape read, Harrison. Yes, sir, Sarah managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Commander Harrison studied her for a moment, and Sarah could see him trying to reconcile what he saw with what he had undoubtedly read in her service record. She was small, even by human standards barely 5 feet tall, and slender to the point where some species might mistake her for a juvenile. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her clothes were civilian standard. Nothing that would indicate she had once been considered one of the most promising officers in the diplomatic corps. I've read your file, Harrison said, his tone carefully neutral. Impressive service record, multiple commendations. Then, he gestured vaguely, and Sarah knew he was referring to the incident report from Rigel 7. Command wasn't sure what to do with you. A translator who won't talk is something of a contradiction. Sarah said nothing, which seemed to confirm his assessment. Well, Harrison continued, we've got a position that might suit you. Deep Space Monitoring Station. Minimal crew, mostly automated systems. Your job would be to monitor communications traffic from various species, identify potential threats or diplomatic opportunities. Lots of listening, not much talking required. It sounded like exile, and they both knew it. A way to keep her technically active in the service, while keeping her away from situations where her apparent inability to function might cause problems. Sarah nodded her acceptance. Good. The transport to monitoring station Omega 7 leaves in 6 hours. That gives you time to get your gear and have a meal. Station's about as far from civilization as you can get, while still being in civilized space. Harrison paused, and for a moment his expression softened slightly. Look, Chen, I don't know what happened on Rigel 7, and I don't need to know. But if you ever want to talk about it, Sarah nodded again, though she had no intention of taking him up on the offer. What could she possibly say? That she had listened to 347 soldiers die in real time, translating their final words, their pleas for help, their messages to loved ones they would never see again. That she had been safe in the command bunker, while people who trusted her to be their voice had been slaughtered by an enemy that seemed to anticipate their every move. That she had failed them all. 6 hours later, Sarah found herself aboard a small courier ship bound for the Outer Rim. The crew was minimal, a Zephyrian pilot and a human engineer who seemed content to ignore her presence entirely. The journey would take 3 days, 3 days of silence and solitude that felt both comforting and terrifying. On the second day, as Sarah sat in the small passenger compartment reviewing the technical specifications for monitoring station Omega 7, the engineer approached her. He was young, probably fresh out of technical school, with the eager expression of someone who genuinely loved his work. You're the new monitor specialist, right? He asked, settling into the seat across from her. I helped install some of the new sensor arrays at Omega Bass 7 last month. Amazing stuff. The range on those things is incredible. You can pick up communications from systems dozens of light years away. Sarah nodded politely but said nothing. The previous monitor specialist was this old Krenari guy. Been doing the job for like 20 years. Real professional, you know? But he said something interesting. Said that in all his time monitoring deep space, he'd been picking up some weird signals lately. Not from any known species. This got Sarah's attention, though she tried not to show it. Yeah, he said they were coming from beyond the galactic rim. Really faint and in some kind of code or language that none of the translation algorithms could crack. Figured it was just cosmic background radiation or maybe some natural phenomenon. But the patterns were too regular, too structured. The engineer leaned forward conspiratorially. Between you and me, I think he got spooked, put in for transfer right after that. The rest of the journey passed in contemplative silence. When they finally arrived at monitoring station Omega 7, Sarah understood why the previous specialist might have felt uneasy. The station was tiny compared to Kepler Station, just a cluster of interconnected modules attached to a massive sensor array that stretched out into space like a metallic flower. It orbited a dead system 13 light-years from the nearest inhabited world, surrounded by the cold vacuum of space and the distant light of stars. The handover briefing was conducted by the station's only other permanent resident, Dr. Vex, an elderly Etherian whose gaseous form had taken on the pale yellow coloration that indicated advanced age among his species. He spoke in the whistling harmonic tones of his people, which Sarah's implant translated seamlessly. The station monitors a sphere of space approximately 50 light-years in diameter, Dr. Vex explained as they floated through the main monitoring chamber. We track all known communication frequencies used by the major galactic civilizations, plus a substantial range of unassigned frequencies. Anything unusual gets flagged for further analysis. The monitoring chamber was impressive, lined with screens and sensor displays that showed real-time data from thousands of sources. Sarah could see commercial traffic reports, military communications, diplomatic channels, even entertainment broadcasts from dozens of worlds. It was like having her finger on the pulse of an entire region of the galaxy. The workstation here is configured for human operators, Dr. Vex continued, indicating a chair and control panel near the center of the room. Your predecessor preferred to work during the station's day cycle, but you're free to establish your own schedule. I maintain the technical systems and rarely require interaction. It was perfect, Sarah realized. She could do her job without having to speak to anyone, without having to engage in the kind of verbal communication that had become so difficult since Rigel 7. She could listen to the universe and catalog its voices without having to add her own to the chorus. Thank you, she said quietly, surprising herself by speaking at all. Dr. Vex's form shifted to a brighter yellow, which Sarah's implant identified as pleased surprise. You are most welcome, Specialist Chen. I believe you will find this assignment quite peaceful. Peace. It was something Sarah had not experienced in months. As she settled into her new routine over the following days, she began to feel something approaching contentment. She spent her shifts listening to the chatter of distant worlds, identifying patterns in communication traffic that might indicate political tensions or economic opportunities. It was work she could do with her eyes closed, the kind of analysis that had made her reputation in the diplomatic corps. But on her 7th day at the station, something changed. Sarah was monitoring the night shift, alone in the communication chamber while Dr. 7th Vex recharged in his quarters. She was cataloging routine traffic from the Centauri trade routes when she noticed an anomaly in the data stream. It was subtle, just a slight irregularity in the background noise from an unassigned frequency range, but her trained ear picked it up immediately. She isolated the signal and ran it through the standard analysis protocols. The computer confirmed what she had suspected. It was not natural cosmic radiation. The pattern was too regular, too purposeful. It was a transmission, but, unlike anything in the galactic communication databases, Sarah spent the next 4 hours trying to decode the signal. She ran it through every translation algorithm available, compared it to known communication protocols, even tried matching it to mathematical constants or physical phenomena. Nothing worked. Whatever was sending the signal was using a communication method completely unknown to galactic science. But as she listened to the raw audio, something nagged at her. There was a rhythm to it, a cadence that seemed almost familiar. She had heard thousands of different languages and communication methods over the years, and her brain was trained to identify patterns even in the most alien sounds. As dawn approached according to the station's artificial day cycle, Sarah made a decision that surprised her. She activated the station's deep space communication array and began to transmit. She did not use words. Instead, she simply echoed back the pattern she had received, matching the rhythm and frequency as closely as possible. It was the most basic form of communication possible. A response that said, I hear you. For 6 hours, nothing happened. Then, just as Sarah was beginning to think she had imagined the whole thing, the response came. The signal was stronger this time, more complex, and buried within its alien structure, Sarah detected something that made her blood run cold. Mathematical constants that corresponded to the composition of inhabited worlds, star charts that matched known galactic navigation markers, and underneath it all, a tone that every human who had ever served in the military would recognize instantly. It was a war cry. Somewhere beyond the rim of the galaxy, something was coming. Something that had been watching the civilized worlds, learning their languages, studying their defenses. And somehow, Sarah Chen, the translator who could no longer bear to speak, had just announced to them that their observations had been noticed. For the first time in months, Sarah felt the need to warn someone, to raise her voice and sound an alarm. But as she sat alone in the vast silence of deep space, surrounded by instruments that could reach across dozens of light years, she realized that she had no idea what to say, or who would listen to her even if she found the words. The universe was about to change, and the only person who knew was someone who had forgotten how to speak. Sarah stared at the signal analysis for 3 days before she finally accepted what her instruments were telling her. The transmission from beyond the galactic rim was not random, not natural, and definitely not friendly. Every few hours, the signal would repeat, but each iteration was slightly different, as if the sender was refining their message based on some kind of feedback they were receiving. The worst part was that the signals were getting stronger. Whatever was sending them was getting closer. On the fourth day, Dr. Vex drifted into the monitoring chamber during what should have been Sarah's rest period. His gaseous form had shifted to a concerned purple, and his harmonic voice carried undertones of worry that Sarah's implant translated as deep unease. Specialist Chen, I have been monitoring unusual power fluctuations in the deep space communication array. Are you conducting unauthorized transmissions? Sarah looked up from her workstation, where she had been running increasingly complex analyses on the alien signals. She had not slept more than a few hours in the past 4 days, and exhaustion was making it even harder to form words than usual. There's something out there, she said quietly, her voice hoarse from disuse. Dr. Vex's form brightened slightly, the Etherian equivalent of raising an eyebrow. Could you be more specific? For a moment, Sarah considered trying to explain everything she had discovered. The alien signals, the mathematical patterns that suggested reconnaissance, the growing strength that indicated something massive approaching from beyond known space. But the words stuck in her throat, tangled with memories of Rigel 7 and the last time she had tried to warn someone about an approaching threat. Instead, she simply gestured to her workstation. Listen, the next few hours were the most she had communicated with another being since arriving at the station. Dr. Braska identified it. Vex proved to be an excellent analyst, his advanced Etherian cognitive abilities allowing him to process the signal data in ways that complemented Sarah's linguistic expertise. Together, they began to unravel the structure of the alien communications. The mathematical components are definitely intentional, Dr. Vex observed, his form cycling through various shades of blue as he concentrated. These frequency patterns correspond to quantum resonance signatures. Whoever is sending this knows about our technology. Sarah nodded, then played back another section of the recording. This part here. It's not mathematical, it's linguistic. But it does not match any known language in the galactic databases. No, Sarah agreed. But listen to the rhythm, the cadence patterns. She enhanced the audio, filtering out the carrier signal to focus on the underlying structure. What emerged was unmistakably the pattern of spoken language, but unlike anything either of them had encountered before. It was harsh, guttural, with consonant clusters that would be difficult for most species to pronounce. My professional opinion, Sarah said carefully, is that this is a military communication, possibly reconnaissance reports. Dr. Vex's form darkened to a deep indigo. You believe we are being observed. I think we've been being observed for some time, and I think whatever's doing the observing has decided it's time to stop hiding. The implications hung in the recycled air of the monitoring station like a toxic cloud. If Sarah was right, then the galaxy was facing a potential invasion by an unknown species with technology advanced enough to monitor civilized space from beyond the galactic rim. And the only people who knew about it were a traumatized translator who could barely speak and an elderly scientist on a remote monitoring station. We must inform the Galactic Defense Force, Dr. Vex said, stating the obvious. Sarah's hands began to shake. The last time she had tried to communicate critical intelligence to military command, 347 people had died. The memory hit her like a physical blow. Sitting in the communication bunker on Rigel 7, translating intercepted enemy transmissions that indicated an imminent attack, trying desperately to get someone to listen as she explained that the enemy knew their defensive positions. They won't believe me, she whispered. The evidence is compelling. Surely, I'm a disgraced translator on punishment assignment. They'll think I'm making it up to get attention. Dr. Vex was quiet for a long moment, his form cycling through subtle color changes that Sarah's implant interpreted as deep thought. Finally, he spoke. Then we must gather more evidence. Irrefutable proof that will force them to listen. Over the next week, Sarah and Dr. Vex worked together to build the most comprehensive analysis possible. They documented signal strength increases, mapped the transmission patterns, and created detailed linguistic breakdowns that would have impressed the xenolinguistics department at any major university. Sarah found herself speaking more than she had in months, though always in whispers and never for very long. But even as they worked, the situation was escalating. The signals were now coming through multiple times per day, and they were being transmitted on frequencies that would be detectable by any monitoring station in the galaxy with sufficient range. If the aliens wanted their presence to be known, they were succeeding. Then, on the 8th day, everything changed. Sarah was alone in the monitoring chamber, running a final analysis on their compiled data before transmitting it to GDF headquarters when every alarm on the station began blaring simultaneously. Emergency lights bathed the chamber in red, and the main display screen showed a sensor reading that made Sarah's heart stop. Massive energy signatures were appearing at the edge of monitored space. Not signals this time, but actual ships, dozens of them, each one larger than anything in the known galactic fleets. Sarah's training took over. She activated the emergency communication array and began broadcasting on the priority military channels, her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her chest. Mayday! Mayday! This is Monitoring Station Omega 7 reporting massive unknown fleet at coordinates 77 Mark 12. Multiple capital ships of unknown configuration. Request immediate GDF response. The response was almost immediate. Omega 7, this is GDF command. Please confirm your previous transmission. Did you say unknown fleet? Confirmed command. Sensor readings indicate approximately 40 vessels of unknown design. Largest ship reads as over 15 kilometers in length. There was a pause, during which Sarah could imagine the chaos her report was causing at GDF headquarters. Finally, the voice came back, more professional but with an undercurrent of concern. Omega 7, maintain continuous monitoring and report all developments. Fleet Admiral Morrison has been notified. Help is en route. Help. Sarah almost laughed at the absurdity of it. The nearest GDF fleet was 6 hours away at maximum jump speed. If these unknown ships decided to move, they could be at any inhabited system in the region long before reinforcements arrived. Dr. Vex drifted into the chamber, his form cycling rapidly between various shades of alarm. Specialist Chen, I am receiving multiple priority communications from research stations throughout this sector. The unknown vessels are broadcasting on all frequencies. What are they saying? That is the concern. They are not saying anything. They are listening. Sarah felt ice form in her stomach. Listening to what? Everything. Commercial traffic, civilian communications, entertainment broadcasts. They are downloading our entire communication network. The implications were staggering. In a matter of hours, these unknown invaders would have access to every public communication in galactic space. They would know the locations of every inhabited world, every military installation, every trade route and defensive position. It would be the most complete intelligence coup in galactic history. Sarah's mind raced through the possibilities. If the aliens had been monitoring galactic communications for an extended period, they already knew the basic layout of civilized space. But real-time access to current communications would give them something far more valuable: the ability to monitor military responses to their arrival in real time. Dr. Vex, she said urgently, we need to shut down the communication relays. I do not understand. They're using our own communication network against us. Every time a GDF commander reports their position, every time a colony requests evacuation support, these things are listening. They're going to know exactly how we respond to them before we do it. Dr. Vex's form shifted to a pale, shocked white. But if we shut down communications, we will blind our own forces as well. Better than giving the enemy a perfect view of everything we do. Before Vex could respond, the main communication console began receiving an incoming transmission on a frequency Sarah recognized. The same alien communication band they had been monitoring for weeks. But this time, the signal was strong and clear, as if the sender was very close indeed. Sarah activated the speakers, and for the first time, she heard the alien voice directly. It was exactly as she had imagined from the signal analysis, harsh, guttural, with consonant combinations that seemed designed to intimidate. But her linguistic training allowed her to parse the structure, to identify the patterns that marked it as genuine language rather than mere noise. And as she listened, her blood turned to ice. She understood it. Not completely, not every word, but enough. The rhythm patterns matched structures from several human languages, particularly the Germanic and Slavic families. The mathematical concepts were expressed using numerical systems that corresponded to those used in human computer networks. And the overall structure, the way ideas were organized and expressed, followed patterns that were unmistakably derived from human speech. Vex, she said quietly, I need to send an immediate communication to GDF command. Of course. What have you discovered? Sarah's hands shook as she activated the secure channel. When the connection established, she recognized Commander Harrison's voice on the other end. Omega 7, this is Harrison. We're scrambling every available ship to intercept the unknown fleet. What's your status? Commander, I need you to listen very carefully. The alien communications are not completely alien. What do you mean? Sarah took a deep breath. They're speaking a modified form of human languages. The mathematical systems they use are derived from human computer protocols. The frequency patterns match human broadcast standards. There was a long silence. Chen, that's impossible. These ships appeared from beyond the galactic rim. Humans have never traveled that far. I know how it sounds, but I'm certain. Someone taught them our languages. Someone gave them our communication protocols. Sarah's voice grew stronger as her professional training asserted itself. Commander, I think these are not aliens at all. I think they are human. The silence that followed was deafening. When Harrison finally spoke, his voice was careful and controlled. Chen. That would imply the existence of a human colony or expedition that we have no record of. Yes, sir. And based on the technology they're displaying, they've been out there for a long time. Long enough to develop capabilities that far exceed anything we have. Your professional assessment? Sarah looked at the sensor readings showing the massive fleet holding position at the edge of monitored space, listening to every communication in the galaxy with the patience of predators studying their prey. My assessment is that we are about to be contacted by humans who have been away from galactic civilization for decades, possibly centuries. And based on their approach pattern and communication behavior, I don't think they're coming home for a reunion. As if summoned by her words, the alien transmission suddenly changed. The harsh guttural language was replaced by something that made Sarah's heart skip a beat. Perfect, unaccented, standard galactic, spoken in a voice that was unmistakably human. Attention, civilized worlds. This is the Terran Deep Exploration Fleet, returning from our mission beyond the galactic rim. We bear greetings from humanity's true children, those who chose the darkness between stars over the weakness of planetary civilization. We come seeking reunion with our forgotten brothers and sisters. Prepare for our arrival. The transmission ended, leaving Sarah and Dr. Vex in stunned silence. Outside the station's viewports, the distant stars seemed suddenly less friendly, less welcoming. Somewhere among them a fleet of ships carrying humans who had been changed by decades or centuries in the void was approaching civilized space with unknown intentions. And Sarah Chen, the translator who had forgotten how to speak, was the only person who understood that humanity was about to meet a version of itself that it might not recognize. The response from GDF Command was swift and decisive. Within 6 hours of the mysterious fleet's transmission, monitoring station Omega 7 was no longer the isolated outpost it had been for years. Sarah watched through the viewports as ship after ship dropped out of hyperspace until the space around the station bristled with the combined might of 3 battle fleets. Admiral Morrison arrived aboard the dreadnought Terra's Pride, a massive vessel that dwarfed even the largest ships in the surrounding fleet. Sarah had heard of Morrison, everyone in the service had. She was a legend, the human who had negotiated the Galactic Defense Force's founding treaty and had never lost a battle in 30 years of service. The Admiral's shuttle docked with Omega 7 just 12 hours after the alien transmission, and Sarah found herself face to face with a woman who seemed to embody everything she had once hoped to become. Admiral Morrison was tall, confident, with silver hair pulled back in a regulation style, and eyes that seemed to evaluate everything around her with tactical precision. Specialist Chen, Morrison said as she entered the monitoring chamber, followed by a small entourage of officers and scientific advisors. I've read your service record. Impressive work before Rigel 7. I understand you've been having some difficulties since then. Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. She had spent the past 12 hours preparing for this moment, rehearsing what she needed to say, but now that Admiral Morrison was here in person, the words seemed to stick in her throat. However, Morrison continued, your analysis of these unknown signals may have prevented a catastrophic intelligence failure. I need you to brief my staff on everything you've learned. The next hour was the most Sarah had spoken since leaving New Terra. With Dr. Vex providing technical support, she walked the Admiral's team through weeks of signal analysis, linguistic breakdowns, and her conclusions about the alien fleet's true nature. As she spoke, she could see the realization dawning on the faces of the military officers. They were not facing an alien invasion, but something potentially far more dangerous. Your assessment is that these are humans, Admiral Morrison said when Sarah finished her presentation. Humans who have been separated from galactic civilization for an unknown period of time. Yes, ma'am. The linguistic evidence is overwhelming, but? Sarah hesitated. What she was about to say would sound like speculation, but her instincts as a translator and cultural analyst were screaming warnings that she could not ignore. Ma'am, the way they speak, the cadence, the word choices, the underlying assumptions in their language structure, it suggests they view galactic civilization as something foreign, something other than human. One of Morrison's advisors, a stern-faced colonel named Richard, spoke up. That could simply be cultural drift. Any isolated population would develop linguistic variations over time. Not like this, Sarah said, her voice growing stronger as her professional expertise took over. The linguistic patterns suggest active rejection rather than passive drift. They're not speaking like humans who have been isolated. They're speaking like humans who have deliberately chosen to become something else. Admiral Morrison studied the tactical displays showing the positions of both fleets. The unknown ships had maintained their position at the edge of monitored space, making no aggressive moves but also showing no inclination to. They were waiting, but for what remained unclear. Had there been any attempts to establish further communication? Morrison asked. No, ma'am. They've maintained radio silence since their initial transmission, but they're still monitoring all our communications. Every tactical discussion, every fleet movement, they're listening to all of it. This drew concerned murmurs from the assembled officers. Morrison raised a hand for silence. Then we'll give them something to listen to. Colonel Richards, prepare a response transmission. Standard diplomatic protocols. We'll arrange a meeting to discuss their intentions. The transmission was sent on multiple frequencies, both human standard and the alien communication bands that Sarah had identified. The response came within minutes, but not in the way anyone expected. Instead of a radio transmission, one of the alien ships moved. The massive vessel, easily twice the size of Admiral Morrison's flagship, broke from the main fleet and approached the GDF forces with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. It took up position just outside the effective range of the human weapons, close enough to demonstrate its capabilities but far enough away to avoid being perceived as immediately threatening. Then it sent a simple message. We will speak. Send your leader to our ship, alone. The debate that followed was intense and immediate. Half of Morrison's officers argued that it was obviously a trap, while the others pointed out that refusing the meeting would likely be seen as an act of hostility. Sarah listened to the arguments with growing unease, her translator's instincts picking up subtleties in the alien message that others had missed. "Admiral," she said quietly, interrupting a particularly heated exchange between two of the senior captains. Morrison turned to her. "Yes, Specialist? The message, the way it's phrased in their language, the word they used for leader doesn't translate to our concept of military command. It's more like one who speaks for the tribe, and alone doesn't mean unaccompanied. It means without weapons or warriors. Cultural differences in terminology." Colonel Richards said dismissively, "No, sir. It's more specific than that. They're asking for a representative, not a commander. Someone who can communicate rather than someone who can make military decisions." Admiral Morrison's eyes sharpened. "Are you suggesting they want a diplomat rather than a fleet admiral?" "I'm suggesting they want someone who understands language, someone who can hear what they're really saying." The implication hung in the air between them. Sarah could see Morrison working through the tactical considerations, weighing the risks of sending a senior officer against the risks of sending someone less militarily valuable. "Specialist Chen," Morrison said finally, "would you be willing to serve as our representative?" The question hit Sarah like a physical blow. The last time she had served as humanity's voice in a critical situation, hundreds of people had died. The memories of Rigel 7 came flooding back, the desperate calls for help, the enemy transmissions that she had translated perfectly but been unable to communicate effectively to the command structure, the screaming that still haunted her dreams. "I don't think," she began. "I'm not asking you to make military decisions," Morrison said, her voice gentle but firm. "I'm asking you to listen, to understand what they're really telling us, to be humanity's ears in a conversation that could determine the fate of galactic civilization." Sarah looked around the monitoring chamber, at the faces of officers and scientists who were placing their trust in someone who had not been able to trust herself for months. Dr. Vex drifted nearby, his gaseous form cycling through supportive colors. "If I go," Sarah said carefully, "I need a direct communication link to this station, and I need someone monitoring the conversation who understands what I'm trying to tell them." "Done," Morrison said immediately. "Dr. Vex will monitor from here, and I'll have my best communications officers standing by." 2 hours later, Sarah found herself aboard a small shuttle approaching the alien vessel. The ship was unlike anything she had ever seen, all angular surfaces and aggressive lines that seemed designed to intimidate as much as to function. As they drew closer, she could see weapon emplacements that dwarfed anything in the GDF arsenal, shield generators that hummed with barely contained energy, and sensor arrays that were probably analyzing every molecule of her shuttle's hull composition. The docking bay that opened to receive them was vast and eerily empty. Sarah, shuttle pilot, a nervous young ensign named Torres, guided them into the cavernous space with obvious reluctance. The artificial gravity and atmosphere seemed normal for human physiology, but there was something subtly wrong about the lighting, the proportions of the space, the way sound echoed off the metallic walls. "Ma'am," Torres said as they landed, "are you sure about this?" Sarah checked her communication equipment one final time. "No, Ensign, but I'm going anyway." The airlock opened, and Sarah stepped into an environment that was technically human but felt profoundly alien. The corridors were too wide, the ceilings too high, as if designed for beings larger than baseline humans. The walls were lined with displays showing star charts that included regions of space she did not recognize, mathematical formulas that seemed to describe physics she did not understand, and text in languages that were recognizably derived from human writing but had evolved beyond easy comprehension. Her escort arrived within minutes. 2 figures in form-fitting suits that covered them completely, with helmets that obscured their faces behind reflective visors. They were tall, nearly 7 feet in height, and moved with a fluid grace that suggested either genetic modification or extensive cybernetic enhancement. "Follow," one of them said in the same harsh accent she had heard in the transmissions. Not a request, but not quite a command either, a statement of expected behavior. They led her through corridors that seemed to stretch for kilometers, past chambers filled with technology that hummed with alien purpose. Through transparent walls, Sarah could see vast spaces where figures in environmental suits worked on projects that defied classification. Some appeared to be modifying their own bodies with mechanical additions, while others manipulated energy fields that cast strange shadows on the walls. The meeting chamber, when they finally reached it, was circular and dimly lit, with a domed ceiling that showed a real-time view of the stars outside. A single figure waited at the center of the room, seated at a curved desk that seemed to have been grown rather than built. "I am Commandant Thorne," the figure said, and Sarah's breath caught. Despite the modifications, the elongated limbs, the metallic implants visible beneath translucent skin, the eyes that had been replaced with glowing optical sensors, the face was unmistakably human, or had been, once. "I am Specialist Sarah Chen, representing the Galactic Defense Force and the Terran Diplomatic Corps." Thorne's modified features shifted in what might have been a smile. "The Terran Diplomatic Corps. How quaint. You still call yourselves Terran even after abandoning your birth world for the comfort of alien space." "We haven't abandoned Terra. It's still—" "Terra is a museum," Thorne interrupted. "A shrine to what humans used to be before they chose the easy path of cooperation over the hard path of evolution." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. "Evolution? We are what humanity becomes when it embraces its true nature, when it stops pretending to be something it is not." Thorne stood, revealing a height that had clearly been enhanced beyond normal human proportions. "We have spent 2 centuries in the void between galaxies, becoming what we were meant to be: predators, conquerors, the apex species that will consume all others." 2 centuries, Sarah repeated, her mind racing. That would put your departure during the early expansion period, before the Galactic Defense Force was even formed, before humanity surrendered its birthright to become pets of alien civilizations? Thorne agreed. "We were part of the Deep Exploration Initiative, 30 ships, 10,000 volunteers tasked with finding new frontiers beyond the galactic rim. We found something better. We found emptiness, void, space where humanity could grow without the weakness of other species holding us back." Sarah's hand moved unconsciously to her communication device. This was information that Admiral Morrison needed to hear. But she had to be careful. Thorne was clearly monitoring her actions, and any obvious attempt to relay intelligence might end the conversation before she learned what she needed to know. "You call cooperation weakness," she said carefully. "But the galactic community has brought peace and prosperity to hundreds of worlds." "Peace," Thorne said with contempt. "The peace of the prey animal hiding from the predator. You've made humanity into gardeners, scientists, diplomats. You've forgotten that we conquered Terra by being the most dangerous species on the planet. We've evolved beyond the need for conquest. You've devolved into something that isn't human anymore. Look at you, small, weak, afraid to raise your voice above a whisper. You represent everything that humanity has become under alien influence." Sarah felt the words hit her like physical blows, but she forced herself to remain calm. "What do you want? Why have you returned?" Thorne moved to one of the transparent walls, gazing out at the stars. "We've come to collect our wayward children, to show them what they could become if they abandoned the weakness of galactic civilization and embraced their true nature. And if they refuse, then we will demonstrate the difference between evolution and stagnation. The galaxy is vast, Specialist Chen. There is room for only one apex species." The threat was clear, but something in Thorne's manner suggested that this conversation was not about negotiation. It was about evaluation. Sarah realized with growing horror that she was not here to discuss terms. She was here to be judged as a representative of what humanity had become, and based on Thorne's reactions, she was failing that judgment spectacularly. "I should return to my people," Sarah said, "to relay your message. But first, I have something to show you." Something that will help you understand the choice that humanity must make. Thorn led her to another section of the ship, where a vast observation chamber offered a view of space that took Sarah's breath away. The alien fleet was arranged in perfect formation, but now she could see that there were far more ships than the sensors had detected. Hundreds of vessels, ranging from massive dreadnoughts to sleek destroyers, all bearing the angular, aggressive design aesthetic that seemed to define this lost branch of humanity. Each ship carries 10,000 of us, Thorn said. 2 million humans who chose evolution over stagnation, strength over weakness. We have returned to offer our cousins the same choice. And if they refuse? Thorn's modified eyes glowed brighter in the reflected starlight. Then we will take what we need and leave the galaxy to those weak enough to deserve it. As Sarah stared at the assembled fleet, she realized that the nightmare she had been living since Rigel 7 was about to become galactic reality. Once again, she was the only person who could warn of an approaching disaster. Once again, the lives of countless innocent beings depended on her ability to communicate effectively with people who might not want to listen. But this time, the enemy spoke with human voices and called themselves the true children of Terra. This time, the enemy was them. Sarah returned to Admiral Morrison's flagship with knowledge that felt like poison in her blood. As she sat in the debriefing room aboard the Terra's Pride, surrounded by the GDF's senior command staff, she struggled to find words that could adequately convey what she had experienced aboard Thorn's vessel. 2 million, Admiral Morrison said, her voice carefully controlled as she reviewed Sarah's preliminary report. 2 million humans modified for combat effectiveness, commanding technology that appears to be decades ahead of our own capabilities. Yes, ma'am. And they don't consider themselves the same species as us anymore. They view galactic civilization as a corruption of human nature, something that weakened us and needs to be corrected. Colonel Richards leaned forward across the conference table. Did they give any indication of their immediate intentions? Are they planning to attack? Sarah closed her eyes, trying to recall every nuance of her conversation with Thorn. They're giving us time to consider their offer. But it's not really an offer, it's an ultimatum. Join them voluntarily, or be conquered by them. What kind of timeline are we looking at? I don't think they're in any hurry. They've waited 2 centuries to return. They can wait a little longer to see our response. But Admiral, there's something else. Something I didn't include in my written report. Morrison's expression sharpened. What is it? Sarah's hands shook slightly as she recalled the final moments of her time aboard the alien vessel. Before I left, Thorn showed me recordings, video logs from their exploration of the space beyond the galactic rim. What did they find? Nothing. Empty space, dead systems, no signs of life anywhere. But that's not what disturbed them. What changed them was the isolation itself. 2 centuries of nothing but void and darkness, and the knowledge that they were the only living things for millions of light years in any direction. Sarah paused, gathering her thoughts. They didn't evolve into predators because they found something dangerous out there. They evolved into predators because the emptiness taught them that nothing else mattered except survival. They came to believe that the universe is fundamentally hostile to life, and that the only rational response is to become more hostile than the universe itself. The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Admiral Morrison was the first to speak. So we're not dealing with aliens or even hostile humans. We're dealing with humans who have been psychologically transformed by extreme isolation. Yes, ma'am. And they view our cooperation with alien species as proof that we've become weak, that we've forgotten the lessons they learned in the void. Colonel Richards pulled up a tactical display showing the positions of both. What are our options, Admiral? Direct confrontation seems inadvisable given their technological advantages. Morrison studied the display for a long moment. Specialist Chen, in your professional opinion as a cultural analyst, is there any possibility of negotiating a peaceful resolution? Sarah thought about Thorn's glowing optical sensors, the casual way he had discussed conquering galactic civilization, the absolute certainty in his voice when he spoke about humanity's true nature. I don't think so, ma'am. They've convinced themselves that their way is the only way for humanity to survive in a hostile universe. Any compromise would be seen as weakness, and weakness is something they've trained themselves to eliminate. Then we need to prepare for war, Morrison said grimly. A war against humans, who have spent 2 centuries perfecting the art of combat. The next 72 hours passed in a blur of frantic preparation. The GDF called in every available ship from across the galaxy, while civilian authorities began evacuating the most vulnerable worlds in the region. Sarah found herself at the center of the intelligence operation, analyzing every communication intercept and trying to predict the enemy's next move. But as she worked, she became increasingly aware that the traditional approaches to warfare were not going to be sufficient. The enemy fleet remained at the edge of monitored space, neither advancing nor retreating, content to observe the GDF's preparations with what seemed like amused interest. They were not behaving like any military force Sarah had studied, which made predicting their actions nearly impossible. They're playing by different rules, she explained to Dr. Vex during one of their analysis sessions. Traditional military doctrine assumes that both sides want to minimize casualties and achieve clear objectives. But these humans don't think like that anymore. What do they think like? Dr. Vex asked, his gaseous form cycling through concerned purples. Apex predators. They're not trying to defeat us quickly or efficiently. They're trying to prove that they're superior. This is as much about demonstrating their evolution as it is about conquest. This insight proved prophetic when the enemy finally made their move. Instead of launching a massive assault on the GDF fleet, a single alien vessel detached from the main formation and began broadcasting on all people of the galaxy, came Thorne's voice, transmitted to every inhabited world within 100 light years. You have been told that we are invaders, conquerors seeking to destroy your civilization. This is not accurate. We are humanity's true children, returning to offer our cousins a gift, the chance to become what they were meant to be. Sarah listened to the broadcast from the monitoring station, which had become the nerve center for intelligence operations. Around her, dozens of analysts tracked the transmission as it spread across galactic communication networks. We do not ask you to abandon your worlds or your technologies, Thorne continued. We ask only that you abandon the weakness that has made you dependent on alien civilizations. Join us, and learn to take your place as the galaxy's rightful rulers. He's not talking to the governments, Sarah said suddenly. He's talking directly to individual humans. Admiral Morrison, who had been monitoring from the Terrace Pride, came through on the secure channel. What do you mean? This isn't a diplomatic communication. It's recruitment. He's trying to convince individual humans to defect. As if to confirm her analysis, the broadcast continued with something that made Sarah's blood run cold. Detailed technical specifications for human genetic modification, instructions for manufacturing advanced weapons, and star charts showing the locations of human colonies that would be liberated in the coming campaign. My God, Morrison said, he's trying to start a civil war, turn humans against their own governments. The strategy was diabolically clever. The GDF was a multi-species organization, dependent on cooperation between dozens of different civilizations. If humans began to question their loyalty to that alliance, if they started to believe that their true destiny lay with Thorne's evolved predators, the entire galactic defense structure could collapse from within. Admiral, Sarah said urgently, we need to counter this broadcast immediately. Every minute it stays on the air, more people are hearing his message. What do you suggest? Sarah took a deep breath. The answer was obvious, but it terrified her more than anything she had faced since Rigel 7. Someone needs to respond. Someone needs to present the alternative viewpoint. Someone needs to speak for galactic civilization. I'll prepare a response immediately. No, ma'am, it has to be someone who can speak to what Thorne is really saying. Someone who understands the psychological appeal of his message. There was a long pause. Chen, are you volunteering? Sarah looked around the monitoring station, at Dr. Vex's concerned presence, at the displays showing Thorne's message spreading across the galaxy like a virus. She thought about the thousands of humans who were hearing that message right now, who were being told that cooperation was weakness and that their true nature was that of predators. She thought about Rigel 7, about the soldiers who had died while she tried desperately to communicate information that could have saved them. She thought about months of silence, of hiding behind her trauma instead of using her skills to help others. Yes, ma'am. I'm volunteering. Chen, you've had difficulty with verbal communication since Rigel 7. Are you sure you can handle a broadcast of this magnitude? Sarah's hands were shaking, but her voice was steady when she replied. Admiral, I spent my entire career learning to be humanity's voice in conversations with alien species. Today, I need to be humanity's voice in a conversation with ourselves. The next hour was a whirlwind of preparation. Sarah worked with Admiral Morrison's communications team to craft a response that would address Thorne's message point by point, while technical crews established a broadcast array that would reach every system where the original transmission had been received. But as the time for the broadcast approached, Sarah found herself facing a problem she had not anticipated. Everything she had prepared to say felt hollow, scripted, like the kind of diplomatic language that would convince no one of anything. Thorne's message worked because it appealed to something primal, something that resonated with deep-seated human instincts about strength and survival. How could she counter that with reasoned arguments about cooperation and mutual benefit? 60 seconds to broadcast, the communications officer announced. Sarah sat before the camera, surrounded by the technology that would carry her words to millions of people across the galaxy. She looked at her prepared notes, then set them aside. 30 seconds. Sarah thought about Thorn's glowing eyes, about the casual way he had dismissed galactic civilization as weakness, about the absolute certainty that had radiated from every word he spoke. 10 seconds. Sarah closed her eyes and thought about everything she had learned in her years as a translator, about the hundreds of species she had helped communicate with each other, about the fragile miracle of different forms of life learning to understand one another. "You're live." Sarah opened her eyes and looked directly into the camera. When she spoke, her voice was clear and strong, carrying no trace of the hesitation that had plagued her for months. "My name is Sarah Chen. I'm a human, born on Terra, educated in the galactic community, and currently serving with the Galactic Defense Force as a translator and cultural analyst. I've just returned from a meeting with Commandant Thorn of what he calls the Terran Deep Exploration Fleet." She paused, letting that sink in. Thorn believes that humanity's future lies in becoming apex predators, in conquering the galaxy instead of cooperating with it. He believes that our alliance with other species has made us weak, that we've forgotten our true nature. Sarah leaned forward slightly. He's wrong. Not about human nature. We are capable of being predators, of being conquerors. We proved that on our homeworld, where we drove dozens of species to extinction before we learned better. But he's wrong about what our true nature actually is. The words were coming easier now, flowing with the conviction of someone who had found her voice again. Our true nature isn't that of predators, it's that of adapters. We're the species that learned to live in every environment on Terra. We're the species that figured out how to communicate with forms of life so alien that most people can't even imagine them. We're the species that took one look at a galaxy full of different civilizations and said, "How can we all work together?" Sarah stood up, moving away from the camera to gesture at the displays showing the alien fleet. Thorn and his people spent 2 centuries in empty space, and they came to believe that the universe is nothing but darkness and death. They're wrong about that too. The universe is full of life, full of intelligence, full of beings who have learned to create something better than an endless cycle of conquest and domination. She turned back to the camera. Yes, we could conquer the galaxy. We have the intelligence, the adaptability, the sheer stubborn determination to overwhelm any other species if we really tried, but we chose not to. Not because we're weak, but because we're strong enough to choose a better path. Sarah's voice grew stronger, more passionate. Thorn thinks that cooperation is weakness. I think that choosing cooperation over conquest when you have the power to conquer is the strongest thing any species can do. It takes real strength to look at someone different from yourself and see a partner instead of prey. The broadcast continued for another 10 minutes, with Sarah addressing specific points from Thorn's message and offering alternative interpretations of human nature and destiny. But the core of her argument remained consistent. Humanity's greatest strength was not its capacity for destruction, but its choice to build instead of tear down. When the transmission ended, Sarah collapsed into her chair, emotionally drained but feeling something she had not experienced since before Rigel 7, the satisfaction of having communicated something important effectively. "Outstanding work, Chen." Admiral Morrison's voice came through the comm system. "Early reports suggest your broadcast is being well received across human-inhabited worlds." But even as Sarah felt a moment of relief, the tactical displays were showing new activity from the alien fleet. Thorn's response to her broadcast was not going to be another transmission. It was going to be a demonstration of what he considered humanity's true nature. War was coming, and this time, Sarah would not be hiding in a bunker translating other people's words. This time, she would be part of the fight. The attack came exactly 72 hours after Sarah's broadcast, and it was unlike anything in recorded galactic military history. Instead of targeting the GDF fleet directly, Thorn's forces struck at 3 lightly defended human colonies simultaneously, their ships appearing from hyperspace with a coordination that spoke of decades of tactical refinement. Sarah watched the tactical displays from the command center aboard the Terra's Pride, her stomach churning as reports filtered in from the besieged worlds. The alien ships, she still thought of them that way, despite knowing their true origin, were not attempting to destroy the colonies. They were conquering them with surgical precision, neutralizing defensive installations while leaving civilian infrastructure intact. "They're taking prisoners," Colonel Richards reported, his voice tight with concern. "Initial reports suggest they're separating human civilians from other species." "Recruitment," Admiral Morrison said grimly. "They're proving their point by showing that they can protect humans while treating other species as expendable." Sarah studied the attack patterns on the tactical display, her translator's instincts picking up nuances that the military analysts were missing. Admiral, I don't think this is just about recruitment. Look at the timing, the target selection. They're forcing us to make a choice. What kind of choice? We can respond to the attacks and try to save the colonies, but that means leaving the main GDF fleet positions to face their primary force. Or, we can maintain our defensive posture and let 3 human worlds fall to prove we won't abandon our strategic position. Morrison's expression darkened as she grasped the implications. Either way, they win. If we abandon our position, they can strike at the galactic core. If we don't respond, they demonstrate that the GDF will sacrifice human lives for the sake of alien allies. It's psychological warfare, Sarah continued. They're not trying to defeat our fleet directly. They're trying to break the alliance by making it impossible for humans to trust the galactic community. Before Admiral Morrison could respond, a new set of alerts began blaring across the command center. The main alien fleet was moving, but not toward the GDF forces. Instead, they were heading directly toward the galactic core, where the most heavily populated systems would be unable to mount effective resistance. Ma'am, the tactical officer called out, at their current speed, they'll reach the Centauri system in 18 hours. Morrison stared at the display for a long moment, weighing impossible choices. How many people in the Centauri system? 40 billion across 6 worlds. Mixed human and alien populations. Sarah watched the Admiral struggle with the decision, and suddenly understood why Thorne had structured his attack this way. He wasn't just trying to conquer territory. He was trying to force the GDF to reveal the true nature of galactic cooperation. Would humans really sacrifice their own species to protect alien allies? Or would the alliance crumble when tested by the ultimate choice? Admiral, Sarah said quietly, I think I know how to stop this. Morrison turned to her with the desperate expression of someone grasping for any alternative to an impossible decision. I'm listening. Thorne isn't really fighting a military campaign. He's trying to prove a philosophical point about human nature. Everything he's done has been designed to demonstrate that cooperation is ultimately illusory, that when survival is at stake, every species will choose its own kind over its allies. And how does that help us? Sarah took a deep breath. We prove him wrong. Not with words this time, but with actions. We split our forces. Colonel Richards looked at her as if she had lost her mind. That's exactly what they want us to do. Divide our strength so they can defeat us piecemeal. No, Sarah said, her voice growing more confident as the plan crystallized in her mind. We split our forces, but not the way they expect. We send mixed species task forces to each threatened system. Human ships protecting alien colonies, alien ships protecting human worlds. We demonstrate that the alliance works both ways. That's suicide, Richards protested. Our individual task forces would be outnumbered and outgunned. Maybe, Sarah admitted. But remember, Thorne's people have been isolated for 2 centuries. They've forgotten how different species can work together, how our varied capabilities can complement each other. They're expecting to face human tactics because they think humans are all the same. Admiral Morrison was silent for a long moment, studying the tactical projections. It's a massive risk. If you're wrong about their psychology, then we lose, Sarah said simply. But if we follow conventional tactics, we lose anyway. At least this way, we lose or win together. The decision to split the GDF fleet was controversial and immediate. Within hours, mixed species task forces were departing for the threatened systems, carrying crews that represented the best of galactic cooperation. Sarah found herself assigned to Task Force 7, headed for the colony world of New Harmony, where 30 million humans and aliens lived side by side. The ship she was aboard, the cruiser Diplomatic Unity, was itself a symbol of everything Thorne's forces opposed. Its crew included humans, Zephyrians, Chronari, Etherians, and a dozen other species, all working together with the kind of seamless cooperation that had taken decades to develop. Captain Maria Santos, the ship's commanding officer, briefed her senior staff as they approached the New Harmony system. Intelligence suggests the enemy will arrive in approximately 6 hours. We'll be facing superior numbers and technology, but we have advantages they don't expect. Sarah, now serving as the ship's tactical analyst and cultural advisor, reviewed the latest reports on Thorne's forces. Captain, I've been analyzing their communication patterns during the attacks on the other colonies. They're coordinating using rigid hierarchical structures, the kind of command system you'd develop if everyone in your organization thought exactly alike. And our advantage is, we're used to coordinating with beings who think differently. Our tactical flexibility comes from having multiple perspectives on every situation. The battle for New Harmony began with Thorne's forces dropping out of hyperspace in perfect formation, their ships moving with the precision of a choreographed dance. But as the engagement progressed, cracks began to appear in their coordination. The alien fleet had planned for human tactics, human ship movements, human psychological patterns. They had not planned for Zephyrian pilots who could make course corrections at speeds that would kill human crews, or chronary shield technicians who could reinforce defensive systems in ways that defied conventional physics, or Etherian strategists who could process multiple combat scenarios simultaneously. Sarah watched from the Unity's bridge as the battle unfolded in ways that clearly frustrated the enemy commanders. Their perfect formations began to break down as they struggled to counter tactics they had never encountered, strategies that could only work when multiple species trusted each other completely. "They're adapting," Captain Santos observed as the enemy ships began to modify their approach, but slowly, much slower than they should be able to. Sarah nodded, understanding what was happening. They've trained themselves to think alike, to eliminate disagreement and discussion. That makes them efficient in familiar situations, but it makes them vulnerable when they encounter something truly unexpected. The turning point came when one of Thorne's ships broke formation to pursue a damaged Zephyrian frigate. The alien vessel moved with deadly purpose, closing in for what should have been an easy kill. But the Zephyrian ship was not fleeing, it was leading its pursuer into a trap. Sarah watched in amazement as the frigate suddenly decelerated at a rate that would have liquefied human crew members, allowing its pursuer to overshoot. Before the alien ship could correct its course, it found itself surrounded by the combined firepower of human, chronari, and Etherian vessels, their weapons coordinated with a precision that spoke of absolute trust. The alien ship was destroyed in seconds, the first casualty among Thorne's supposedly superior forces. "Target destroyed," the tactical officer reported, with barely concealed amazement. Sarah felt a surge of hope, but also recognition. This battle was not just about military victory, it was about proving that cooperation could triumph over isolation, that diversity was strength rather than weakness. As the engagement continued, the pattern repeated across all the threatened systems. Thorne's forces, trained for 2 centuries to fight as a unified predator species, found themselves outmaneuvered by opponents who fought as a diverse community. Every tactical doctrine they had developed assumed they were facing enemies who thought like them, who shared their assumptions about strength and weakness. They were not prepared for beings who saw their differences as advantages rather than limitations. The decisive moment came when Thorne himself entered the battle, his massive flagship appearing from hyperspace to turn the tide against the GDF forces. The ship was even more impressive up close, bristling with weapons that could have destroyed entire fleets single-handedly. "All ships, this is Commandant Thorne," came the familiar harsh voice over the communication channels. "You have fought bravely, but this ends now. Surrender, and I will spare your alien allies. Continue to resist, and I will demonstrate why predators always triumph over prey." Sarah looked at Captain Santos, seeing her own determination reflected in the other woman's face. "Captain, I'd like to respond to that transmission." Santos nodded. "Open a channel." Sarah took a deep breath, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. Her trauma from Rigel 7, her months of silence, her fear of speaking when lives hung in the balance. Then she thought about all the voices she had helped translate over the years, all the different forms of intelligence she had helped communicate with each other. "This is Specialist Sarah Chen," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the communication array. "Commandant Thorne, you've forgotten something important about human nature." "And what is that?" Thorne's voice carried amusement, as if he was indulging a child. "We're not just predators, we're pack hunters. We work together. And our pack isn't just human anymore." As if summoned by her words, the combined fleet moved with a coordination that Thorne's forces could not match. Human ships provided covering fire while Zephyrian vessels made impossible course corrections. Chronari vessels used their superior shielding to protect more vulnerable allies, while Etherian ships provided strategic coordination that anticipated enemy movements before they were made. Sarah watched Thorne's flagship struggle to respond to tactics that required not just skill, but trust. Trust between species, trust between individuals who saw the universe differently but worked toward common goals. "You call this strength?" Thorne's voice cracked with frustration. "Dependence on inferior species?" "I call it evolution," Sarah replied. "Real evolution. Not just changing our bodies or our technology, but changing our perspective. Learning to see the universe as bigger than just human ambition." The final exchange was brief but decisive. Thorne's flagship, isolated by its inability to coordinate effectively with its own forces, found itself facing the concentrated firepower of the entire GDF task force. As the ship's shields failed and its hull began to rupture, Thorne sent one last transmission. "You think you have won," he said, his voice distorted by static and the sounds of a ship dying around him, "but you have only delayed the inevitable. The void between galaxies is vast, and we are not the only ones who have learned its lessons. the transmission cut off as Thorne's flagship exploded, taking with it the dreams of human supremacy that had driven the alien fleet across the empty spaces between stars. In the aftermath of the battle, as rescue operations began and the surviving alien ships retreated into hyperspace, Sarah found herself in the Unity's communication center, composing a report for Admiral Morrison. But the words that came to her were not the dry tactical analysis that regulations required. Instead, she wrote about voices, about the hundreds of different ways that intelligence could express itself, about the music that emerged when those voices learned to harmonize instead of compete. She wrote about strength that came not from isolation but from connection, not from conquest but from cooperation. Most importantly, she wrote about the name that her fellow crew members had begun using for her during the battle, a name that had emerged spontaneously from the heat of combat when her words had helped coordinate impossible maneuvers, and her voice had rallied defenders who spoke dozens of different languages. They called her Bridge Speaker, the one who helped different forms of life communicate across the vast gulfs that separated them. It was a name Sarah Chen could live with. Months later, as she stood before a gathering of representatives from across the galaxy, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her from the silent monitoring station to this moment. The Galactic Council had convened to discuss the implications of the alien threat and humanity's role in the larger galactic community. The attacks have ended, she told the assembly, her voice carrying clearly through translation devices that rendered her words in hundreds of different languages. But the questions they raised remain. What does it mean to be human in a galaxy full of other forms of intelligence? What does it mean to be strong when strength could be used for conquest? She paused, looking out at faces that represented dozens of species, hundreds of worlds, billions of individual lives that had chosen cooperation over domination. I think the answer is that being human means being part of something larger than ourselves. It means learning to listen to voices that don't sound like ours, to understand perspectives that don't match our own. It means choosing to build bridges instead of walls, even when building walls would be easier. Sarah smiled, remembering the small woman who had been too afraid to speak, and the person she had become through the simple act of choosing to use her voice when it mattered most. We are not the apex predators that Thorne believed we should be. We are something better. We are translators. We are bridge speakers. We are the species that learn to make the galaxy a place where different forms of life can understand each other. The applause that followed was polyphonic, a symphony of approval that spoke in frequencies and rhythms from across the spectrum of galactic civilization. And for the first time since Rigel VII, Sarah Chen listened to that chorus of voices and knew that she had found her place among them. She had learned to speak again, not just for humanity, but for the community of minds that made the galaxy more than just a collection of stars and planets. She had become Bridge Speaker, and the universe was vast enough for all the voices it contained.